Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm Rory and Ken is taking a well-earned break. But joining me today is Meg Moss, who's Head of Policy and Public Affairs at the National Counselling Society, soon to be the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society. Meg Moss, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, Rory. Thank you for having me again. This is not my first time gracing your podcast listeners with my counselling knowledge.
It's not.
It's really exciting to be back. Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to see you. And I'm sure that regular listeners of the podcast will know that you've spoken before about different topics regarding the National Counselling Society. But today you're here to talk about the Accredited Registers Programme. So I think the first question is, what is the Accredited Register Programme, Meg?
Well, that is a very good question. So the Accredited Register Programme is something that was set up way back in 2012, initially by the Department of Health, as was now the Department of Health and Social Care. It was kind of set up to provide a level of protection around services related to healthcare that weren't covered by statutory regulation. So we're obviously talking about counselling, psychotherapy, acupuncturists, audiologists, clinical physiologists, play therapists, all that kind of thing. So the Accredited Register Programme was then administered by an organisation called the Professional Standards Authority, which some of you may have heard of, some of you might not have heard of. But if you've heard of the Accredited Register Programme, then you should know that it's the Professional Standards Authority that oversee that. And the authority, who I will refer to as the PSA now, because Professional Standards Authority is very long, the PSA, they also oversee a lot of the statutory registers. So the General Medical Council, the Nursing and Midwifery Council, the Optical and Dental Councils and all that sort of thing. So they oversee those and they oversee the accredited registers as well.
Yeah, so I think it'd be fair to say that counselling at the time of this podcast, and certainly in the UK, is not a regulated profession. There are some exceptions to that, which we won't go into in the podcast, but generally speaking, it's not a regulated profession. Counsellor, unlike a doctor, isn't a protected title. Anybody could give themselves the title of counsellor or indeed psychotherapist. And would it be correct in thinking that the Accredited Registers Programme and the Professional Standards Authority are rather like an umbrella accountability organisation where other ethical bodies sit underneath? So I guess what I'm asking is that would the PSA inform the NCS about the kind of standards, or would there be any kind of synergy between the organisations to set a standardisation that would sit with most ethical bodies within counselling?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. And I think it's something actually that the authority themselves are really thinking about how that will work in the future. But at the moment, what they don't really set minimum standards for entry to the profession. That's actually for the professional body to do themselves, because they look after such a range of professions. They haven't so far been involved in that kind of really minute detail. So kind of at the moment, counselling and psychotherapy professional bodies could all have separate entry levels to their accredited registers, and they do. So the PSA doesn't necessarily look at that, but what they look at is kind of the kind of public safety element of things. So we have to show that the standards of training that people meet are to a high level. We also have to show that, the professional conduct that we expect of our registrants is to a high level. We have to show how we're protecting the public, and we have to show how we are developing the profession and encouraging our registrants to kind of continue to do better in the profession as well. It's about best practice, and it's about safety and transparency. So while it doesn't go down to the level of like, you have to have a level 4 qualification to get onto a counselling and psychotherapy register. They do kind of make sure that our standards are pretty high on the other things, and that it does kind of feed down into those minimum standards. And actually kind of the de facto standards for the profession have become this kind of off-qual level 4, aside from the PSA thing, but influenced by the PSA accredited registers. Sorry, that's probably a really quite a nebulous thing to talk about.
No, I think it's really on point, Meg, because it does speak to the many facets of our profession of counselling. And certainly when I took my qualification in 2004, I qualified in 2004. The off-qual didn't exist. There wasn't any overview. So I had colleagues who'd gone to private training providers who'd written a counselling course and issued a counselling diploma. There may be those listening now who were trained really well. I could think of one in Manchester that went on for many years, was well renowned for its training in person-centred theory. But I think when in 2003 or 2004, the government of the day recognised that there had to be a levelness of qualification across what would be counselling and anything else, to be honest. I taught criminology, I taught health and social care as a tutor, and they were all set at a levelness for employers to be able to say that this person's qualification matches a certain level. So when people employed, they knew exactly what they were employing, and it standardised it. And I think what you were saying is that standardisation of qualification is a starting point for how you standardise within the National Counselling Society and what's expected from registrants or members.
Yeah, exactly. It's just about making sure that the people that are admitted onto an accredited register, so it's not just our accredited register, there are others, but it's that they have got that minimum level that we would expect to see, and that everyone is kind of growing to expect to see. The number of 2-year part-time off-qual level 4 courses that are available in the UK has grown significantly over the past decade or so, like you say, since 2003-ish. And that's kind of what you tend to see as an introduction to the practicable level of counselling and psychotherapy.
Yeah, so people would leave with a qualification, and then what we used to speak about in teaching was professional formation. In other words, they would go on then to do other qualifications or CPD or develop their practice and, I guess, hone the mastery at it. And I guess ethical bodies support that idea, that, help people grow and develop. I know that NCS offer CPD opportunities and that type of thing. So in terms of accredited registers, you talked about protection to the public. What reassurance does an accredited register give to the public who may be, or members of the public who are seeking counselling?
So I guess from an accredited register perspective, if you are looking at a counsellor who is registered with a professional body that holds an accredited register, please bear with me, you can trust that accredited register, so for example, the NCPS, as will be shortly, our complaints process has been subject to the scrutiny of the Professional Standards Authority and they review our complaint cases on an annual basis to make sure that we are handling complaints correctly. People can refer to the Professional Standards Authority if eventually they're not happy with the complaints process. Although I don't think that's happened as yet. But so you know that there's this kind of really robust level of oversight that's going into that. And if you're thinking about an organisation that's not part of the Accredited Register programme, then perhaps they will also have a complaints process. But the extra kind of safety and security that you get from an accredited register is that, that's had the oversight of an organisation that oversees statutory regulators. And you also have the knowledge that a practitioner that's on an accredited register, if they have had a complaint upheld against them, so this is, looking at the perspective of a client, for example, they would be reassured that someone who's had a complaint against them and had sanctions imposed and have been removed from an accredited register, they won't be able to simply rejoin another accredited register. So there are things in place to kind of stop that from happening. From a technical perspective, it's called Standard 10E, and that stops people kind of hopping from register to register. Now, obviously, if a register is not under the Accredited Register programme, then there's no way of preventing that from happening. But it is something that we're really kind of focused on, is making sure that public protection is paramount, which means that members of the public can feel much more reassured by choosing a practitioner that's on an accredited register.
Yes, and I think this is a consequence maybe of counselling at the current time not being a regulated profession, and that there's not just one ethical body that speaks for counsellors. I think when I had a look, there were 11 in the UK. Some of them represented more specialist areas of counselling. And, from my experience, I have known or heard of individuals who have done exactly that. They've had a complaint and they've just left the organisation and hopped on to the next organisation and hopped along. And, the truth of the matter is there are practitioners who are inept and who are poor practitioners, maybe even abusive practitioners. It's not something the profession sometimes likes to acknowledge, but there is. If you speak to anybody who's dealt in professional standards at any level, in any organisation, you will hear stories that are incredibly disappointing and some that are quite frightening. And that is why it's really important that, I guess, therapists are held accountable.
Yeah. And the Accredited Register programme is a really good way of doing that, because I know you said, it's not a regulated profession, and that on the surface, people might think that would give even more kind of protection from kind of rogue counsellors and psychotherapists or people that are kind of out to do harm or anything like that. But I would say actually the Accredited Register programme is set up perfectly to do that. But it also gives us this amazing diversity in terms of organisations and practice. And like you said, there's organisations for specific modalities. There's organisations that look at certain kind of like faith-based counselling and all of that sort of stuff. So not having a single overarching regulatory body allows us to have that kind of the diversity in the profession that's been protected. And I think that's really important to kind of shoehorn in there. And I think we've spoken about this before anyway, haven't we? But you can still get that level of public protection from the Accredited Register programme. And we demonstrate it. We do it all the time. It does come up. That we can't allow people to join our register until they've met their sanctions from another register, and if they have met those sanctions, can they even be included, or is it just actually no, you can't can't join anywhere else. We talk about that stuff all the time. I think you probably spoke to our public protection officer.
Yes, we were.
The other day, and she probably also spoke about that. So I don't want to go on and on about something that people probably already heard about or will hear about, depending on when this goes out. But it's really interesting, and I think it's public protection is vital, and we do that every day. And I personally don't think statutory regulation would help any more with that kind of public protection side of things. Yes,
I think you make an interesting point, and you've alluded to your colleague who will be joining us on the podcast in a few episodes to talk about how the complaints procedure works and sanctions and the mechanism of that. So thank you for reminding everybody. And as a real, no, don't have to apologise at all. I'm just hoping that people listening to this will say, "Oh, I must tune in for that." So
you should. It will be very interesting.
It will be very, very interesting. So I think there's some confusion sometimes around the term accredited. Because there's accredited courses, there's accreditation for therapists, and there's accredited registers. So talk me through the process of what happens when somebody joins. If they're either doing their qualification or have qualified with a suitable qualification. We talked of off-qual. However, we have to nod and be respectful to colleagues in Wales and Northern Ireland and Scotland. They have a slightly different set of boards, but they're effectively the same mechanism. They just go by different names. So what happens when someone joins? What's the journey for somebody?
So there's quite a straightforward journey, I think. If you're coming from a course where you have met the kind of basic minimum standards that we'd be looking for, so we talked a bit earlier about an off-qual or equivalent, like you say, level 4 course in counselling and psychotherapy, kind of a generalist course, not a very kind of highly specific course either. Then it's really quite simple. What we ask for is a copy of people's qualifications and for them to agree to, answer some questions about things like unspent convictions, previous complaints, that kind of thing. And then, provided all of our kind of checks go okay, that are done by the membership services team and then our assessment team, then they will be included in our register. So our register is the thing that is accredited by the Professional Standards Authority. Individual members aren't themselves accredited by the Professional Standards Authority, but they are accredited by us in the traditional sense of the word accredited. They have met the standards to use our logo, to use the wording that we agree for them to use in their names, on their emails. So they would be able to use ONCS Accred after their name if they wanted to. And that's kind of it.
Yeah, so that's
very complicated.
So it's not, and in fact, I've recently become a member of the NCS, and I found
have you?
I have indeed, and I found the transition very, very straightforward. I was treated like everybody else. I was asked for all the information, and I sent it in, and I got a little email saying that you're now an accredited member of the NCS, and I think that's an interesting point to follow up on, because there's a difference between being an accredited member and accreditation, isn't there? So people can go on and take and become accredited or senior accredited. It's yes. So
our membership grades at the NCS, soon to become NCPS, are so you join as an accredited registrant. You can then, if you want to work for, say, an EAP or the NHS, you would want to work towards accredited professional registration, which is the equivalent of BACP accreditation. And it's basically what employers will look for often when, we're talking about big employers, so EAPs. The NHS also look for that for most of their roles. And then then there's a senior accreditation grade, which is kind of further experience over and above what we would have expected for accredited professional registrant. And there is, I will admit that there is a lot of confusion in the profession over the use of the term accreditation. And it's something that we kind of come up against a lot and talk about a lot. And all I can really say on that is that we use the word accreditation in the way that it is traditionally used. And whatever kind of other political issues there are around that, I can't particularly comment on. I think, my own personal opinion is I think that accreditation is accreditation, but I know counselling and psychotherapy has its own very unique way of using that.
Yes.
So whether that will change, I don't know. But
and I think it's to be fair to the NCS and to other ethical bodies, they're responding to what employers are asking, aren't they? And in terms of someone being an accredited professional, you rightly say that the NHS, EAPs, people who are employing, could be schools, all have usually in the job specs working towards or have professional accreditation. It's something that employers are asking for in job specifications. Now, we talked about individual registrants. What about organisations? Can an organisation come along and become an accredited member?
So we don't really accredit organisations. We have organisations that have joined us, and we treat those more like collaborations and partnerships. Mm-hmm. So we have accredited training, which is kind of different. So we will accredit training courses that are a route to our accredited register. And they are, like we were talking about, your kind of off-call level 4s, 2 years part-time. But in terms of kind of organisations and how we work with those, if they're not like doing training, I think we tend to, we have some more kind of collaborative relationships. We do have recognised counselling services, but again, that's not necessarily an accreditation, but it's more kind of a recognition of what an organisation does. And they have to meet kind of certain requirements in order to get recognised counselling service status with us. But we don't call it accreditation, I guess, because of that kind of acknowledgement that accreditation means something.
Yes.
But it's quite a nice way that we work with organisations, actually. We have a lot of partnerships. So we talk about them as partnerships and try to work collaboratively to improve what we do and to improve what they do. And we have a lot of really interesting programs, like with a charity called Mates in Mind. We have something set up at the moment where, so Mates in Mind are a charity that works in the construction industry. So they work with construction organisations. And I don't know if you're aware, but kind of the rates of suicide amongst construction workers are shockingly high.
Gosh,
it's awful. And so what we do is we work with Mates in Mind who signpost the organisations that work with them to our registrants, and they have kind of like a set fee for counselling, and like a kind of program of that and how that would work, and support them through that process. And it's working really well, just bringing up that conversation within that industry and helping people to know that there is somewhere that they can reach out to. So it's that kind of thing. And we're working with another few organisations to bring in something similar. So it's that kind of work that we're not just doing it, we're not just working within the counselling and psychotherapy world, we're actually reaching out and working with organisations in other industries to really share the benefits of counselling and psychotherapy and how important it can really be.
Yeah, so it's a very holistic approach that the NCS has. It's a holistic approach. It's counsellors and psychotherapists, but also reaching out into other areas where people may need mental health support and helping develop policies and procedures and ways of working, I suppose, being collaborative with them. In terms of the Accredited Registers Programme, I think what my final question is, what protection does it give those who are registries? So if I've recently joined, I've joined the Accredited Registers Programme. I've been with another ethical body for some time, and I was with this. I would have transferred over. So, what kind of protection and benefits would a registrant have by being a member of or being on the Accredited Register?
So that's a really good question. So what you have is the knowledge that the society or whichever ethical body that you're with is beholden to the Accredited Registers Programme and the PSA to meet certain standards which will benefit you. So thinking about one of the things that we get checked on is our management of the register. So how we manage that, how we look after our registrants, how we deal with your information, the standards for registrants. So you know that the standards that you know that you've met the standards to go on this accredited register. So you can share that widely with your clients, with potential clients. Just say, you can rest assured that I've met these standards because these are the standards of the Accredited Register Programme, and these are therefore the standards that my ethical body meet. So talking about maybe like governance. So our governance is all overseen as part of the Accredited Register Programme. And that's really important for our members because it means that we're not going to drop the ball on something really vital, like not being able to continue to function as a register and somehow not being able to afford to keep running our website, which is vital for people on an AR because practitioner directory that we have that people get clients through, that will still be able to exist. All of the different services that we provide, our governance is monitored to make sure that we can still provide those things even if something goes wrong. So we have to be really kind of hot on that stuff. We have to make sure that we're being clear in the communication that we provide to our members and to members of the public. We just have to meet all of these really high standards, which means that the quality of organisation you're getting is going to be so much higher from an organisation that's subject to the Accredited Register Programme. I'm not saying that organisations that aren't subject to the Accredited Register Programme can't do these things if they want to. Of course they could, and they could meet these standards if they wanted to, but they don't have to, and we do.
Yeah. So
that we have to do all this stuff, otherwise we don't get to renew our accreditation.
Yes.
And we are checked every year.
So, and also I think that, practitioners do worry about complaints. So I guess one of the benefits of being on an accredited register is that you know that should you be subject to a complaint, you know that the complaint will be dealt with fairly and in a way that meets the standards of how complaints should be dealt with. You're not going to be in front of a kangaroo court, as we might have said in the past. It's going to be a professionally formulated group of people who have a number of specialities who can give a fair but accurate observation of your practice should a complaint be raised.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is definitely one of the things. Complaints are a huge part of what the Professional Standards Authority will check. But I just want to say, for anyone that is kind of worried about having a complaint made against them, that certainly from the NCS's perspective, we are not out to make anyone, feel terrible or be unnecessarily punitive or scary. And in fact, one of the things that we tried to develop in our complaints process, which I think is quite particular to the NCS, is this a kind of openness and accessibility, being very evidence-based, but also being very supportive towards the counsellor as well. So we have something that's called, I'm just going to repeat what Rachel's saying. So I don't want to do that because I'll spoil that podcast for you. And I really think you should listen to it. But we do have a really excellent complaints process. And I think it's really important for counsellors and psychotherapists to look at the complaints process of any professional body that they're going to join. Not that I think you're all at risk of having a complaint made against you, but I just think it's that just that level of trust and collaboration with your professional body. And I think you have to be really confident about that, that you would be happy if it happened to work within that complaints process.
Absolutely.
So do have a look around and see what's out there.
Yeah. And I think what I'm hearing is that in terms of the NCS, the Accredited Registers Programme, the work that sometimes has to be done should a complaint be made, that you are the organisation or the society is more of a supportive, sometimes critical friend than a kind of punitive law enforcement person.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Sometimes things happen that aren't expected in therapy, and we like to work towards an outcome that is suitable for the client, but in a way that doesn't unnecessarily draw the process out for both the client and the counsellor, because it is a very tricky time for people to go through that complaints process. It's a very emotional time, especially for the client, because you are potentially having to kind of relive whatever's happened in your, or whatever's gone wrong with your counselling relationship for the entirety of that time that you're waiting for an outcome. Anyway, I don't want to waffle on about it. It's also not my area of expertise.
Well, I think that segues beautifully into the fact that I will be interviewing one of your colleagues in depth on the complaints process, and she will be speaking about how complaints are handled, how they're sometimes colloquially known as disposed of. So, if you're interested in how an ethical body works, keep tuning into the podcast because we'll be covering that. I think this has been a fascinating insight into the importance and structure and mechanism of the Accredited Register Programme. It's demystified it for me, and it just leaves me to say, Meg Moss, Head of Policy and Public Affairs at the NCS, soon to be the NCPS. We're going to add the psychotherapy into there at some point. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Rory. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.